many people are desperate to try to change who they are. And then other parents and other people that influence them will often pressure them to go into that.
Sure. Well, I appreciate, your laying that out, and, it's obviously a complicated, difficult issue. It just, to me, it certainly feels like this is public policy. Senator Strobel?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. I have a question. So if someone has undergone conversion and they now think that that might not have been the right decision, which seems to be happening more and more, will any professional counselor, will they be prohibited from helping them to detransition? How would that be looked at?
No, absolutely not. The role of a licensed clinical social worker or professional therapist is to help start where the client is at and help them process their feelings. It's not to convince them, oh, you shouldn't be gay or something like that. Not at all. It's to work with the client, work with their feelings, and support them in their path. But it's not to influence them one way or the other.
So if they came in as a biological male,
Yeah.
and said, gee, I think I'm a female, you could only tell them that's appropriate. But once they made that,
You wouldn't tell them that. You help them through you help them process their feelings.
if you counseled them that that might not be the right decision, that would be something that would possibly require them to lose their license.
Well, you don't counsel them that say that this might not be the right decision. You work with them on just going through the process of working with them and helping them process out their feelings about what's going on. But you don't try to tell them, oh, this is not the right decision. That's not something that you tell people.
Well, if that isn't arbitrary or capricious, I don't know what is.
What?
But so if someone then has transitioned to a female,
Yeah.
and wants to be a male, then it's okay to tell them that they can. How do you work with them then? I'm
It's consent.
I don't quite
It goes one way, but it doesn't go the other way.
I don't quite understand, Senator, your question. I'm sorry, if you could.
Well, so I didn't understand your answer to begin with about how it would not be arbitrary or capricious when someone would be born a biological male.
Yeah.
And might want to become a female. I didn't quite understand your answer to that. But what I'm saying is, once that person transitioned to a female, that biological male, and now decides they might want to detransition, you're indicating, how would you counsel that person? Could they be counseled, no, you should stay what you transition to?
No.
Or okay, so you're
It's
saying
consent-
you
it's
could
consent
tell them
of
they
the client.
potentially, you could tell them
Consent.
potentially they could stay what they transition to, or you could counsel them based upon their individual factors and what's all going on, that they could transition back to their biological sex, at least what their birth sex. You're saying it could go either way in that instance.
The role of a therapist is to work with the client's feelings and give them a safe environment so that they can discuss issues, and including it could be their gender identity that they're working with. It's not, we're not telling them what they should or should not do. We're helping them. It's a safe environment for them to discuss these personal issues.
But it seems like you are, because if you dictate a course of action, irregardless of the therapist's analysis or an individual's unique mental state, if that's professional malfeasance, I mean, I really don't get where you're coming from.
Okay. Well, sorry.
I think maybe we should move on at this point. Is there anything else, Senator Strobel? Or?
Not for now.
Okay. Senator Royce.
Thank you. As I said, I'm not a social worker, but my mom is, and the exchange here, I think, is a perfect illustration of the absurdity that's occurring here.
It's ridiculous.
Legislators are not therapists, and probably a lot of legislators have not even been to therapy as a client, although maybe we should. And the job of a counselor is not to direct a person into this is correct or this is incorrect, right? It's not a lawyer. Just as a doctor is not gonna say, you have to go with chemo. They're gonna lay out your options. They're gonna help you process your thoughts and feelings. They're not gonna say, you should continue with transition or not. You should do this treatment or not. They're gonna help you think through what's important to you, and you make the decision as the client. That's a principal-client relationship. That's how doctors and patients operate. The patient, the client is at the center, and they are the decision maker. I think that's really basic. But I wanna go to ledge counsel for a little bit, because I think the process discussion should be secondary to the harm that this body is gonna do if they suspend this rule. But I think it's really important to understand what's going on with the process. We're not discussing a ban on conversion therapy in Wisconsin. The legislature has the power to do that. There have been bills introduced for several sessions to ban conversion therapy, meaning that no one would be able to access it in Wisconsin, even voluntarily, right, to the chair's point. But correct me if I'm wrong, ledge counsel, we're not talking about a statutory ban on conversion therapy for anyone in Wisconsin to receive. What we are talking about is a professional, licensed group of professionals regulating their own conduct as to what is ethical, what is professional, just as any licensed profession in the state does. They're talking about what their members are allowed to do, what they're allowed to charge money to do, while still holding their state credential, correct?
Yeah, the rule is one of the proposed rule sub 25 is one of the elements of unprofessional conduct, but there are statutory consequences for a person who violates the rules of unprofessional conduct. They can be subject to regulation, disciplinary proceedings, both by the examining board and DSPS. And so when something is listed as unprofessional conduct, it is, if everyone's following the law, unwilling to break that rule of professional conduct, those, in this case, that service would be unavailable to be offered by anyone who's subject to the licensing requirements of the chapter. So there are also, I think, for context, there are exceptions to providing services. There's a pastoral counselor exception that allows services of a similar nature to those contemplated by Chapter 457 to be provided without being licensed. However, if you do hold the license, you are subject to the standards of unprofessional conduct.
Right. So, just to restate what you said, we're talking about licensed professionals being subjected to limiting their license, paying a fine, having their license suspended, or some kind of other consequence if they violate this rule of professional conduct that is properly and very routinely applied to every single licensed professional in the state, whether you're cutting hair, counseling somebody, or whether you're a physician. We're not talking about whether or not an adult can go to a preacher that is homophobic and say, help me, I'm struggling and I would like you to help make me straight. That is not banned by this. That is not being contemplated here. It is not implicated in this. It is simply saying that if you hold this license and you're gonna say, hey, I'm a professional, I'm a therapist, I'm a counselor, I will help you, and then some unwitting person sends their adolescent who is suffering from depression or being bullied, sends them to that counselor, thinking that that counselor is going to help them, and instead, their young person is being abused and subject to something that no responsible medical professional could call treatment, and they're charging money for it. That's what we're talking about here. So I think it's really important to just cut through the idea that somehow this is about banning conversion therapy or not. It's about protecting consumers in Wisconsin, protecting vulnerable teens and families from predatory, unprofessional therapists, which I don't think there are very many, and that's why this rule was so uncontroversial when it was passed. Because people who want to help others with mental health struggles understand that conversion therapy is harm, it's abusive, and it's wrong.
Senator Bradley, no, sorry. Senator Noss?
Yes, I just want to mention, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a builder, I'm not a plumber. I don't run a recycling business, yet we legislators deal with all of those. In fact, today, I'm not a farmer, but we're gonna be voting on cover crops in this committee. Swimming pools and short-term rentals, we're gonna be dealing with that today. We're gonna vote on that. I'm not a hotel owner, don't have a swimming pool, but we're gonna make decisions on that using our common sense and what we have heard from testimony and hearings. And for the public listening in who heard that members have not had access to this legislation has been out here for at least, the administrative rule, for at least a month, as was identified December. And the reason it's out there right now, there's a window, a small window. Last session, this rule was dealt with by this committee and it was rejected. It was stopped. So when session ended, the hammer went down and everything in session is gone. And so now we start anew. And the board ignored what we had done last session. And they're coming back once again with the same rule we rejected. And so that's why that small window is there until we reject it again. Then it stops. So I don't want people to be misled that, oh, it's in place right now. Yeah, it is for that little sliver of time until we once again reject it. And I would also add, as far as not having access to this, and the public should be aware too, that legislators have had access to this since December. It's on the legislative website. Staff have access to that. So if someone missed it, you had a month to see it, at least. That's all.
Representative Condon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, thank you for providing a definition of arbitrary and capricious. But I'm a little confused about the context now, because it's in our motion, and I think that's why you've defined it for us. But Senator Strobel, you used it in the context of the person seeking therapy being arbitrary and capricious. So can someone explain to this new committee member the context of it in the motion?
Yeah, Ledge Council, do you want to explain, because I believe the Senate took a vote on that, and we were, after the Senate vote, 3-2, then we brought it here. Is that how that process worked on the arbitrary and capricious?
Oh, yeah.
She's asking about the arbitrary and capricious within the conversation and where that's coming from.
Sure, I can speak to that. So the first thing, I think Senator Strobel was referring to it just in the more substantive context of what's prohibited and what's not. Statutorily, in terms of the committee's powers, the term arbitrary and capricious arises as one of the terms and the grounds for which this committee is empowered to object or suspend